Wife throws cake at black husband for not paying the bill, but his next move shocked everyone. The restaurant fell silent as the chocolate frosting slid down Marcus' face. Every pair of eyes turned to the corner table where Amelia, his wife, stood with her arms still outstretched, trembling with fury. The ruined birthday cake, meant to celebrate their 5th anniversary, now clung to Marcus' shirt like a bad memory. Gasps filled the air, forks paused mid-bite, and whispers rippled through the room. But instead of shouting back, Marcus wiped his face calmly, his eyes scanning the crowd. Then he did something no one expected. He smiled. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, standing tall, his deep voice cutting through the murmurs. "Let me show you how a real man handles disrespect." The restaurant held its breath, and Amelia froze. Marcus grabbed a pitcher of ice water from a passing server's tray. Amelia's eyes widened, her lips parting to scream, but before she could react, Marcus swung the pitcher, not toward her but toward himself. The icy water cascaded down his head, mixing with the cake and washing it to the floor. The crowd was stunned into silence, unsure whether to laugh, applaud, or intervene. And then Marcus turned back to Amelia, dripping but composed, and said the words that shocked everyone even more. The day had started peacefully. Marcus and Amelia were excited to celebrate their anniversary at one of the finest restaurants in town. Marcus, a history teacher at the local high school, had spent weeks planning the surprise dinner to make Amelia happy. She loved fancy places, and while their budget was tight, Marcus believed she deserved the best. Amelia, on the other hand, was already on edge. She had spent the afternoon arguing with a client over a botched real estate deal, and the stress had followed her into the evening. Marcus had noticed her tension as they drove to the restaurant, but he hoped the beautiful setting and delicious food would cheer her up. At first, it seemed to work. They laughed over appetizers and reminisced about their first date. Amelia's smile returned, and Marcus relaxed, thinking the night was back on track. He even ordered the dessert she loved, a rich chocolate cake with gold detailing. It was expensive, but seeing Amelia's face light up when it arrived made it worth it. But then the waiter handed Marcus the check, and Amelia's mood shifted. "You're paying for this?" she asked sharply, her voice loud enough to turn heads. Marcus looked at her, confused. "Of course I am. It's our anniversary. Do you even have the money for this, Marcus?" Amelia hissed, her eyes narrowing. "Or are we going to eat ramen for the rest of the month because you wanted to play big man for one night?" His heart sank. He hadn't expected this reaction. "Amelia, it's a celebration. We deserve it," she scoffed, leaning back in her chair. "Deserve it? You think buying an overpriced cake will fix anything? You can't even pay half the bills without my help, Marcus." Her words cut deeper than any knife. Marcus felt the eyes of strangers burning into his skin as she went on about his poor decisions and inability to manage money. He tried to stay calm, but each word was a reminder of how much she resented him. When the waiter returned, Marcus handed over his credit card without a word. Amelia glared at him, her chest heaving with anger. And then, as the server placed the cake on their table, Amelia snapped. "You want to waste money on this?" she yelled, standing abruptly and grabbing the cake. "Here's your celebration." Before Marcus could react, the cake was in his face, its frosting smearing across his cheeks and dripping onto the table. The restaurant erupted into chaos, some patrons gasping, others laughing uncomfortably. Marcus felt humiliated, but he knew one thing. He wouldn't let Amelia's anger define the night. That's when he grabbed the pitcher of water. The tension in the room was unbearable. Amelia's face turned pale as Marcus stared at her, drenched but composed. For a moment, she looked ready to storm out, but Marcus' next words stopped her in her tracks. "This isn't about the bill, Amelia," he said, his voice calm but firm. "This is about respect. And right now, neither of us is showing any." The crowd watched, captivated, as Marcus pulled out his wallet and laid cash on the table, more than enough to cover the bill and a generous tip. Then he took a deep breath and looked at Amelia one last time. "If you want to throw cake, fine. But don't forget who's been standing by you through everything." He turned to the stunned restaurant, nodded politely, and walked toward the exit, leaving Amelia frozen in place. But as the door swung shut behind him, something unexpected happened. Amelia grabbed her purse, ran after him, and the crowd erupted into whispers again. What happened next would turn their anniversary into a story no one in that restaurant would ever forget. Marcus walked briskly through the cool evening air, his wet clothes clinging uncomfortably to his body. His face burned with a mix of embarrassment and frustration, though he kept his expression neutral. He refused to let anyone see how much Amelia's public outburst had affected him. He stopped under the glow of a street lamp, unsure whether to wait for her or just keep walking. "Marcus." Amelia's voice rang out behind him, sharp but tinged with something softer. "Regret? Maybe." He didn't turn around. She caught up, panting slightly, and stood a few feet away. Her makeup was smudged, and her eyes darted around nervously, avoiding his gaze. The awkward silence stretched between them. "What do you want, Amelia?" Marcus asked finally, his voice low but steady. "Another round of insults? Or maybe another dessert to throw?" Her lip quivered, but she forced herself to speak. "I didn't mean for it to go that far." Marcus raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "You threw a cake in my face, Amelia. In front of 100 people. That's not exactly something that just happens." She flinched, folding her arms defensively. "You're acting like I'm the only one to blame here. You're always trying to prove something, Marcus. Spending money we don't have." "It wasn't about proving anything," he snapped, his calm demeanor cracking. "It was about making you happy. It was about celebrating us, Amelia. But I guess that doesn't matter anymore." For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of traffic in the distance. Amelia looked down, fiddling with the strap of her purse. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, almost inaudibly. Marcus stared at her, searching for sincerity in her words. He wanted to forgive her, to move past the night's events, but something in him resisted. The memory of her shouting, the cake smeared on his face, the laughter of strangers, it all still stung too much. "I don't think you understand what you did back there," he said finally, his tone softer but still firm. "It wasn't just about the cake or the money. It was about respect, Amelia. You humiliated me." Her eyes filled with tears, and for the first time that night, she looked genuinely remorseful. "I didn't mean to humiliate you," she whispered. "I was upset, and I didn't think. She stopped mid-sentence as the sound of approaching footsteps caught their attention. A group of teenagers walked by, their loud laughter echoing in the empty street. One of them, a tall boy in a hoodie, glanced at Marcus and smirked. "Yo, nice outfit, man," he said, nudging his friends. "What happened? Lose a food fight?" The others burst into laughter, and Marcus clenched his fists, his patience worn thin. But instead of reacting, he closed his eyes and took a deep breath, letting the moment pass. The teenagers moved on, their laughter fading into the distance. Amelia stepped closer, her voice tentative. "I know I messed up, Marcus, but can we just go home and talk about this?" He hesitated, torn between wanting to resolve things and needing space to process everything. Finally, he nodded. "Fine, but this isn't something we can just sweep under the rug, Amelia. We need to figure out why this keeps happening." As they walked toward the car, the tension between them was palpable. Amelia tried to fill the silence with small talk, but Marcus only gave short, curt responses. The drive home was quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Back at their small apartment, Marcus changed out of his soaked clothes and sank onto the couch, his mind racing. Amelia busied herself in the kitchen, making tea as if normalcy could erase the chaos of the evening. When she finally joined him, she handed him a mug and sat down, her expression anxious. "I want to explain," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "It's not just about the money, Marcus. It's everything. Work has been stressful, and I feel like I'm carrying so much on my own. And tonight, when I saw the bill, it felt like too much." Marcus sipped his tea, letting her words sink in. "I get that you're stressed, Amelia. I am too. But throwing a cake in my face? That's not how we solve things." "I know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was wrong. I was angry, and I took it out on you. I'm sorry." Her apology was genuine, but Marcus still felt a lingering sense of unease. This wasn't the first time their arguments had escalated to something dramatic, though it had never been this public before. He loved Amelia, but he couldn't shake the feeling that their relationship was on shaky ground. "We can't keep doing this," he said finally. "We can't keep tearing each other down every time things get hard." Amelia nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I don't want to lose you, Marcus. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." For the first time that night, Marcus felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they could find a way to fix things. Maybe this could be the turning point they needed. But just as they began to talk about moving forward, a loud knock on the door interrupted them. Both of them froze, exchanging confused looks. It was nearly midnight. Who could possibly be visiting at this hour? Marcus stood cautiously and approached the door. "Who is it?" he called out. No answer. The knock came again, louder and more urgent this time. Marcus' heart pounded as he unlocked the door and opened it just a crack. What he saw on the other side made his blood run cold. "Mr. Jones," a stern voice said. Two police officers stood there, their expressions serious. "We need to speak with you and your wife immediately." Marcus froze, gripping the edge of the door. His mind raced as he tried to process what the officers could possibly want. Amelia appeared behind him, her face pale and tense. "Is there a problem, officers?" Marcus asked, doing his best to keep his voice calm despite the knot forming in his stomach. The taller of the two officers, a man with a neatly trimmed beard, stepped forward. "We received a call about a disturbance involving you and your wife earlier tonight at the restaurant." The caller claimed it escalated into something concerning. Marcus blinked in disbelief. "A disturbance? You mean the argument?" "That's all it was. Just an argument." The other officer, a younger man with a clipboard, glanced at Amelia. "Sir, we're just here to ensure everything is okay. Can we come in and ask a few questions?" Amelia stammered, "We're fine. It was just a misunderstanding. Nothing serious." The officers exchanged a glance, their skeptical expressions suggesting they weren't entirely convinced. "We'd like to verify that," the older officer said. "It won't take long." Marcus hesitated, his frustration bubbling under the surface. He didn't want to escalate things further, but he also hated the idea of being treated like a suspect in his own home. With a sigh, he stepped aside and opened the door fully. "Come in," he said reluctantly. The officers entered, their presence filling the small apartment with a heavy tension. Marcus and Amelia sat on the couch, while the officers remained standing, observing their surroundings. "So," the younger officer began, flipping through his notes. The caller reported that there was yelling, objects being thrown, and an altercation that seemed to spill outside. "Can you confirm what happened?" Marcus frowned. "Objects being thrown? The only thing thrown was a cake. My wife was upset, and she acted out. That's it. No one was hurt, and there was no fight." Amelia nodded quickly. "I was angry, and I made a scene. I've already apologized to my husband. We're fine now." The officers didn't look entirely convinced. "Mr. Jones," the older officer said, "is there anything you'd like to add? If you're feeling pressured to stay silent, we can help." Marcus felt his temper flare. "Pressured? Are you serious? My wife and I had a disagreement. It's not a crime to argue." Amelia placed a hand on his arm, her eyes pleading for him to stay calm. "Marcus, it's okay." But he couldn't hold back anymore. "No, it's not okay," he snapped, standing up. "We had an embarrassing moment in public, and now we're being treated like criminals. We didn't do anything wrong." The younger officer raised a hand in a placating gesture. "Sir, we're just doing our job. When we get a call like this, we have to follow up." "Who even called you?" Marcus demanded. "Was it someone at the restaurant? One of those nosy people who couldn't mind their own business?" "We can't disclose that information," the older officer said firmly. "Our priority is ensuring there's no ongoing risk here." Amelia stood as well, her voice trembling but steady. "Officers, I promise you, there's no risk. I was wrong to throw the cake, and I've apologized to my husband. We've talked things through, and we're working on it." The officers exchanged another glance, their postures relaxing slightly. The younger one finally closed his clipboard. "All right, we'll take your word for it. But if anything changes, or if you feel unsafe at any point, don't hesitate to call us." Marcus shook his head in disbelief, but bit his tongue. He walked them to the door and closed it firmly behind them, leaning against it as he let out a long breath. Amelia stood in the middle of the room, her arms wrapped around herself. "I can't believe this," Marcus muttered. "All because of one stupid cake." Amelia looked at him, guilt etched across her face. "I'm so sorry, Marcus. I didn't think it would go this far," he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Neither did I. But here we are." The next morning, Marcus woke up with a headache. He hadn't slept much, replaying the events of the night over and over in his mind. He found Amelia in the kitchen, sipping coffee and staring blankly at the table. "We need to figure this out," he said, sitting across from her. "Last night was a wake-up call. If this keeps happening, it's going to destroy us." Amelia nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know. I've been so angry lately, and I keep taking it out on you. It's not fair." Marcus reached across the table, taking her hand. "We need help, Amelia. Maybe counseling or something. We can't keep trying to fix this on our own." She hesitated, but then nodded again. "Okay, whatever it takes." For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. But before they could continue the conversation, his phone buzzed on the counter. He picked it up and frowned at the unfamiliar number. "Hello," he answered. A deep, unfamiliar voice responded. "Mr. Jones, this is Detective Harris. I'm calling about an incident involving your wife last night." Marcus' heart sank. "What incident?" The detective hesitated. "There's been a complaint filed against her for assault." Marcus gripped the phone tightly, his mind racing. "Assault? That's ridiculous. Who would file something like that?" "It was just a cake, for God's sake." The detective's voice remained calm but firm. "Mr. Jones, the complaint alleges that your wife's actions last night caused emotional distress to another patron in the restaurant. They claim that they were struck by the flying cake and have decided to press charges." Marcus blinked in disbelief. "You're telling me someone is pressing charges because of a piece of cake?" "I understand it sounds unusual," Detective Harris replied. "But under the circumstances, the complaint has to be addressed. I'd like to meet with you and your wife to discuss the matter further. Are you available to come to the station today?" Marcus glanced at Amelia, who was watching him with wide, anxious eyes. "Give me a moment," he said into the phone, lowering it slightly. "It's about last night," he told her. "Someone's filed a complaint against you for assault." Amelia's face went pale. "What? That's insane." "Who?" "They didn't say," Marcus replied. "But they want us to come to the station." Her hands flew to her mouth. "Marcus, I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I was angry, but I didn't throw the cake at anyone else." "I know," he said, though his own nerves were fraying. "Let's just go down there and clear this up." He brought the phone back to his ear. "We'll be there in an hour." At the police station, the atmosphere was cold and sterile. Marcus and Amelia sat in a small interview room, waiting for the detective. Marcus could feel Amelia's leg bouncing nervously beside him, and he placed a reassuring hand on her knee. She glanced at him, her eyes filled with fear. The door opened, and Detective Harris entered, a tall man with sharp features and an air of authority. He carried a file in one hand and gestured for them to stay seated as he took a seat across from them. "Thank you for coming in," he began. "I know this situation might feel overwhelming, but I want to make sure we handle it fairly." "Detective," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady, "this whole thing is absurd. My wife didn't mean to hurt anyone. It was an argument that got out of hand, and the cake didn't even—" Detective Harris held up a hand. "I understand your perspective, Mr. Jones, but the complaint alleges that your wife's actions led to an injury." Amelia leaned forward, her voice trembling. "An injury? What injury? I didn't hit anyone. I threw the cake at my husband, not at some stranger." The detective opened the file and slid a photo across the table. It showed a man in his mid-40s, wearing a suit that had been stained with chocolate frosting. "This is the complainant. He claims that he was struck in the face by the cake, and that the incident caused him both physical and emotional distress. He's seeking damages." Amelia stared at the photo in shock. "That's a lie. The cake didn't even leave our table. It hit Marcus, not him. Marcus frowned, leaning closer to examine the photo. Something about the man's face seemed familiar. Wait a minute, he said, his voice sharpening. I recognize him. He was sitting a few tables away from us. He didn't get hit by anything. This is a scam. Detective Harris raised an eyebrow. A scam? Yes, Marcus said, his voice rising. This guy is just trying to make money off of us. He saw the argument, saw an opportunity, and now he's making up a story. Amelia nodded emphatically. That's exactly what it is. This man is lying. The detective leaned back in his chair, studying them carefully. If what you're saying is true, we'll need to verify it. The restaurant has security cameras. I'll review the footage and see if it supports your version of events. Relief flooded Marcus' chest. Good. Please do. That will prove we're telling the truth. Detective Harris nodded. In the meantime, I advise you not to contact the complainant or discuss this case publicly. Let us handle the investigation. As they left the station, Amelia clung to Marcus' arm, her body shaking with nerves. I can't believe this is happening, she whispered. What if they don't believe us? What if the footage isn't clear? Marcus squeezed her hand. We didn't do anything wrong, Amelia. The truth will come out. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that this situation was far from over. Something about the man's accusation didn't sit right with him. He couldn't figure out why, but he had the nagging sense that there was more to this story than met the eye. That evening, as they sat together in their living room, Marcus' phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from an unknown number. You think you can get away with humiliating me? This isn't over. Marcus stared at the message, his heart pounding. He showed it to Amelia, who gasped. Who is that? She asked, her voice trembling. I don't know, he admitted, though his gut told him exactly who it was. The man from the restaurant, the one who had filed the complaint. But how did he get Marcus' number? And why was he so determined to escalate this? Before Marcus could respond, another text came through. You'll regret crossing me. Watch your back. Amelia clutched his arm, her face pale with fear. Marcus, what's happening? What does he want? I don't know, Marcus said grimly. But one thing was clear. This was no longer just about the cake. The texts weighed heavy on Marcus' mind as he paced the living room, his phone gripped tightly in his hand. Amelia sat on the couch, her arms wrapped around her knees, eyes darting nervously toward the phone each time it buzzed. The messages kept coming, each one more threatening than the last. You think you're smart? You're nothing. I'll make sure you both pay. You humiliated me. I don't care what it takes. I'll ruin your lives. Marcus stopped pacing, his jaw tight. This guy's unhinged. We need to go to the police. Amelia looked up at him, her face pale. And tell them what? That some random guy is texting threats? They'll probably say it's unrelated to the case. Marcus sat beside her, his frustration evident. This isn't random. It's the same guy, Amelia, the one from the restaurant. He's trying to intimidate us because he knows his complaint is bogus. Then why does it feel like he's winning? Amelia whispered, her voice cracking. I can't take this, Marcus. I feel like we're being hunted. Marcus put an arm around her, pulling her close. We're not going to let him scare us. We'll go back to Detective Harris and show him the texts. If they're serious about investigating, they'll have to take this into account. The next morning, Marcus and Amelia returned to the police station. Detective Harris met them in the same interview room, his expression neutral but attentive. You're back sooner than I expected, he said, gesturing for them to sit. Marcus placed his phone on the table and slid it toward the detective. He's been sending us these. Detective Harris picked up the phone and scrolled through the messages, his brow furrowing as he read. These are serious threats, he said after a moment. You're saying these are from the complainant? Marcus nodded. Who else would it be? He filed a false complaint, and now he's trying to bully us into, I don't even know what. Backing down? Settling? He's unstable. The detective glanced at Amelia. Have you responded to any of these? She shook her head quickly. No, we didn't want to make it worse. Good, he said. Engaging with him would only escalate things. I'll add these messages to the case file and see if we can trace the number. Marcus leaned forward. What about the security footage? Have you reviewed it? Detective Harris sighed. Not yet. The restaurant's manager is cooperating, but retrieving and reviewing footage takes time. Rest assured, it's a priority. Marcus exchanged a glance with Amelia, both of them visibly deflated. They had hoped for more immediate answers. Back home, the tension lingered. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were still vulnerable. Every knock at the door or car pulling up outside made both of them jump. Amelia tried to distract herself with chores, but her anxiety was palpable. That evening, Marcus sat at the kitchen table, staring at his laptop. He was researching legal options, trying to figure out what they could do to protect themselves, when his phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a text, it was a call. The screen displayed a private number. He hesitated for a moment before answering. Hello? The voice on the other end was low and menacing. You think you're safe? You think the police will protect you? You have no idea who you're dealing with. Marcus' grip on the phone tightened. Listen to me, whoever you are. If you think you can scare us, you're wrong. You're messing with the wrong people. A chilling laugh echoed through the line. You don't even know my name, do you? But I know everything about you. Marcus Jones, history teacher at Crestview High. Amelia Jones, real estate agent. Nice little apartment on Elm Street. I wonder how your students or your clients would feel if they knew the truth about you. Marcus' blood ran cold. What do you want? He demanded. You'll find out soon enough, the voice replied. And then the line went dead. Marcus set the phone down, his hands shaking. Amelia entered the room, alarmed by the look on his face. What happened? He told her about the call, watching as her expression shifted from fear to sheer panic. Marcus, he knows where we live. He knows everything about us. I know, Marcus said, trying to keep his own fear in check. But we're not going to let him control us. Tomorrow, we'll go back to the police with this new information. They have to take action. That night, Marcus barely slept. Every creak in the apartment, every gust of wind outside, felt like a threat. He stayed up, sitting by the window, watching for any sign of danger. Around 3 a.m., a car slowed as it passed their building. Marcus tensed, watching as it idled in front of their apartment complex. The car's headlights turned off. Marcus' heart pounded. He reached for his phone, ready to call the police, but before he could, the car sped off into the night. The next morning, he and Amelia drove back to the station. This time, they were greeted by Detective Harris, who looked more concerned than before. I have an update, the detective said as he ushered them into his office. We reviewed the security footage from the restaurant. It shows exactly what you described. The cake hit Mr. Jones, not the complainant. There's no evidence of your wife targeting anyone else. Relief washed over Amelia's face. So does that mean the case is closed? Detective Harris hesitated. Not quite. While the footage clears you of the assault allegation, it doesn't explain the threats you've been receiving. We've traced the numbers sending the texts and making the calls. It belongs to the complainant, but there's more. Marcus leaned forward, his jaw tight. What do you mean? The detective's expression darkened. The complainant, Jonathan Reed, has a history of harassment and extortion. He's been involved in several cases where he's targeted couples, filing false complaints, and using intimidation tactics to extract settlements. Amelia gasped. So this is all part of some scheme? Detective Harris nodded. It seems that way. But here's the bad news. He's careful. He knows how to operate within the law, and proving his intent can be difficult. Marcus clenched his fists. So what do we do? Just wait for him to come after us again? The detective's eyes were serious. We're working on it. In the meantime, I suggest you stay vigilant. And if he contacts you again, call us immediately. That evening, Marcus and Amelia tried to find a semblance of normalcy, but the weight of the situation hung over them. They ate dinner in near silence, both lost in their thoughts. Just as they were clearing the table, a loud bang echoed through the apartment. They froze. Another bang followed, this time louder, coming from their front door. Marcus motioned for Amelia to stay back as he approached the door cautiously. He looked through the peephole but saw no one. His heart raced as another bang shook the door. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice firm. No answer. And then, through the peephole, he saw it. a piece of paper sliding under the door. Marcus hesitated before picking it up. Scrawled across the paper in jagged letters was a single word: run. Marcus stared at the paper, his hand trembling as he processed the chilling message. Run. His mind raced with questions. Was it a warning? A threat? Both? He turned the paper over, searching for more clues, but it was blank on the other side. Amelia stood frozen a few steps away, her eyes wide with fear. What does it say? She whispered, though her tone suggested she already knew it wasn't good. Marcus held the paper up, showing her the single, ominous word. Her hand flew to her mouth as a stifled gasp escaped her lips. We're calling the police, Marcus said firmly, grabbing his phone. Before he could dial, another noise shattered the tense silence. A loud crash from outside, followed by the sound of tires screeching away. Marcus rushed to the window, his heart pounding. A black sedan was speeding down the street, disappearing into the night. What was that? Amelia asked, her voice trembling. Marcus squinted into the darkness. I don't know. Stay here. Ignoring her protests, he opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. The sound of his own breathing filled his ears as he scanned the dimly lit corridor. It was empty. Moving cautiously, he walked toward the stairwell, peeking over the railing to check the floors below. Still, nothing. When he stepped outside, his stomach dropped. The windshield of his car was shattered, the glass glittering under the streetlights like shards of ice. The words, "Stay quiet," were spray-painted in red across the hood. Marcus felt a wave of rage and fear wash over him. He clenched his fists, taking slow, deliberate breaths to keep himself from spiraling. This was no longer just a game of intimidation. Whoever was behind this wanted to make it clear that they could get close, too close. Amelia appeared in the doorway, clutching her phone. Marcus, what's... Her voice faltered as she saw the car. Oh my God. He rushed back to her, guiding her inside. Go back in. Lock the door. Minutes later, the police arrived. Detective Harris was among the responding officers, his expression grim as he surveyed the vandalism. Marcus and Amelia stood on the sidewalk, wrapped in jackets but still shivering, not from the cold but from the weight of what was happening. This is escalating, Harris said, his tone serious. We'll dust for fingerprints and check any nearby cameras. But until we identify him, you two need to take precautions. Marcus frowned. Precautions like what? This guy knows where we live. He knows everything about us. How are we supposed to feel safe? Harris sighed, clearly sympathetic but limited by protocol. Do you have somewhere else you can stay? A family member? A friend? Amelia shook her head. No, this is our home. We shouldn't have to leave because of some lunatic. I understand how you feel, Mrs. Jones, Harris said, his voice gentle but firm. But this is about your safety. Until we have enough evidence to arrest him, relocating might be your best option. Marcus exchanged a glance with Amelia. The thought of leaving their home, even temporarily, felt like a defeat. But the alternative, staying and risking further danger, was even worse. We'll think about it, Marcus said finally. The next morning, Marcus and Amelia packed a few essentials and drove to a motel on the outskirts of town. It was small and unremarkable, the kind of place people barely noticed. Harris had suggested it, saying it was better to stay somewhere less obvious. As Marcus unloaded their bags, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they were being watched. The motel room was plain but clean, with 2 double beds, a small TV, and a tiny bathroom. Amelia sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Marcus sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. We'll get through this, he said, trying to sound confident. Harris will catch him. And once this is over, we'll go back home, and things will go back to normal. Amelia leaned against him, her voice barely above a whisper. What if this is our new normal? Marcus didn't have an answer. That night, Marcus woke with a start. At first, he wasn't sure what had roused him. The room was dark, the faint hum of the air conditioner the only sound. He sat up, his heart pounding, straining to hear anything unusual. Then he heard it, a faint scraping sound outside the door. Amelia, he whispered, shaking her gently. Wake up. She stirred, groggy and confused. What is it? Someone's outside. Her eyes widened, and she sat up quickly, her breath catching in her throat. Marcus motioned for her to stay quiet as he grabbed his phone and crept toward the door. He peered through the peephole but saw nothing but shadows. The scraping sound came again, this time followed by a faint knock. It was slow, deliberate, and eerily calm. Marcus dialed Detective Harris, his hands trembling as he pressed the phone to his ear. "Harris, it's Marcus Jones. Someone's outside our motel room." "Stay inside," Harris said immediately. "Don't open the door. Officers are on their way." The knock came again, louder this time. Marcus backed away, his heart pounding. He glanced at Amelia, who was clutching a pillow, her face pale with fear. Suddenly, the knock stopped. The silence was deafening, stretching on for what felt like hours. Marcus moved closer to the door, holding his breath. And then, without warning, a note was slipped under the door. It was folded neatly, its edges crisp. Marcus hesitated, every instinct screaming at him not to pick it up. But he needed to know. He unfolded the paper, his blood running cold as he read the words scrawled in bold, messy handwriting. "You can't hide." Amelia gasped, covering her mouth as tears streamed down her face. Marcus clenched the note in his fist, his jaw tight. The sound of approaching sirens broke the tension. Marcus opened the door cautiously, finding the hallway empty. Whoever had been there was already gone. When Detective Harris arrived, he took the note as evidence and assured them that officers would patrol the area for the rest of the night. But his expression betrayed his concern. "This isn't just intimidation anymore," Harris said, his tone grave. "This guy is escalating. He's not going to stop until he gets what he wants, or until we stop him." Marcus nodded, his resolve hardening. "Then stop him, before it's too late." But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were already running out of time. The sun barely peeked through the thin curtains of the motel room when Marcus awoke, the tension from the night before still heavy in the air. Amelia was still asleep, curled up on her side, her face tight with worry even in rest. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the note Detective Harris had taken as evidence. "You can't hide." The words echoed in his mind like a sinister mantra. Marcus reached for his phone, scrolling through his messages. No updates from Harris yet. He debated calling the detective again, but decided against it. He knew they were doing everything they could, but the waiting was unbearable. Amelia stirred and opened her eyes. "Morning," she mumbled, sitting up slowly. Her voice was hoarse, and her eyes looked as though she hadn't slept much. "Morning," Marcus replied softly. "How are you feeling?" She let out a hollow laugh. "Terrified." "How are you?" "The same," he admitted. He wanted to say something comforting, to reassure her that everything would be fine, but the words felt empty. By mid-morning, Detective Harris called. "We have a development," he said without preamble. "You and Amelia need to come to the station." "What kind of development?" Marcus asked, his voice taut with impatience. "We traced the number that's been sending the texts and making the calls. It's definitely tied to Jonathan Reed, the complainant. But we also found something else. Something I need to show you in person." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "We'll be there soon." At the station, Harris led them into a private room and closed the door. He placed a folder on the table and opened it, revealing several photos. Marcus leaned forward, his stomach tightening as he recognized the man from the restaurant. "This is Jonathan Reed," Harris began. "He's been involved in similar incidents across 3 states. But this isn't just about extortion." He slid another photo across the table. It showed Reed standing with a man who looked vaguely familiar. Marcus frowned, trying to place him. "That's Thomas Lang," Harris explained, "a private investigator who works for Reed. He's been known to dig up dirt on his targets and use it to blackmail them." Amelia gasped. "Blackmail? So this isn't just about the restaurant incident?" Harris nodded grimly. "No. Reed picks his targets carefully, usually couples with some kind of vulnerability. Financial struggles, marital issues, anything he can exploit. Once he files a complaint, Lang steps in to gather information to use against them." Marcus' mind raced. "So what's their angle with us?" "We're still piecing that together," Harris admitted. But I'd bet they're counting on you settling the complaint to avoid further harassment or public embarrassment. Amelia shook her head, her voice trembling. This is insane. We didn't do anything wrong. How can people get away with this? They're careful, Harris said. Reed keeps his hands clean, and Lang operates in the shadows. It makes them hard to prosecute. Marcus felt a surge of anger. So what do we do? Just let them keep threatening us? No, Harris said firmly. We're building a case. Now that we've linked the threats to Reed, we can file charges. But we need more evidence to make it stick. I need you both to be patient. The ride back to the motel was tense. Amelia stared out the window, her arms crossed tightly. Marcus gripped the steering wheel, his jaw set. He hated the feeling of powerlessness, the idea that they were being used as pawns in some elaborate scheme. We can't just sit around and wait, Marcus said suddenly, breaking the silence. Amelia turned to him. What are you saying? I'm saying we need to take control of the situation. If Reed and Lang are digging into our lives, we need to dig into theirs. Amelia's eyes widened. You're not seriously thinking about confronting them, are you? No, Marcus said. Not yet, anyway. But I'm done playing defense. If they want to mess with us, we'll hit back. That evening, while Amelia paced the room nervously, Marcus sat at the small desk with his laptop. He began researching Jonathan Reed and Thomas Lang, combing through public records, news articles, and social media. The more he dug, the more a pattern emerged. Reed's previous targets had all been people with something to lose: jobs, reputations, families. In every case, he used fear and manipulation to coerce them into paying settlements. Lang, on the other hand, was a ghost. There were no online profiles, no photos, no records of his work. The only trace Marcus could find was a single article mentioning his involvement in a high-profile divorce case that had ended in scandal. Marcus, Amelia said softly, breaking his concentration. What if this gets worse? What if they come after us again? He looked up at her, his expression serious. They will. But this time, we'll be ready. Around midnight, Marcus' phone buzzed again. It was another text, this time with a photo attached. The image showed the motel's parking lot and their car. Nice hiding spot, the message read. Amelia saw the photo over his shoulder and let out a choked sob. Marcus, they're here. He stood abruptly, his heart pounding. Stay here, he said, grabbing the motel room's landline and calling the police. He gave their location and explained the situation, his voice tight with urgency. After hanging up, he peered out the window. The parking lot was empty, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Marcus, Amelia whispered, her voice shaking. I'm scared. He turned to her, his jaw set. I won't let them hurt us. I promise. Moments later, there was a loud knock at the door. Both of them froze. Marcus grabbed the closest thing he could find, a heavy lamp, and moved cautiously toward the door. Who is it? He called out. No answer. The knock came again, louder this time. Marcus gripped the lamp tightly, his pulse racing. He reached for the doorknob, steeling himself for whatever was on the other side. But just as he was about to open the door, the glass window near the back of the room shattered. Amelia screamed. Marcus spun around, his heart leaping into his throat as he saw a figure climbing through the broken window, their face obscured by a hood. Without thinking, he charged toward them, the lamp raised high. The intruder lunged at him, knocking the lamp from his hands. They grappled, the sounds of their struggle filling the small room. Amelia grabbed the motel phone, screaming for the police to hurry. Finally, Marcus managed to land a solid punch, sending the intruder sprawling onto the floor. But before he could pin them down, they scrambled to their feet and bolted through the broken window. Marcus stood there, breathing heavily, as the sound of sirens approached. When the police arrived, he pointed toward the shattered glass. They went that way. The officers fanned out, searching the area, but the intruder was already gone. One officer stayed behind, taking their statements and promising to increase patrols in the area. As they boarded up the window, Marcus turned to Amelia. This ends now, he said, his voice filled with determination. No more running. No more hiding. But what can we do? She asked, her voice trembling. Marcus clenched his fists, his jaw tight. We fight back. On our terms. The following morning, Marcus sat at the motel's small table, staring at his laptop screen. Dark circles hung under his eyes from a sleepless night, but his focus was razor-sharp. Amelia sat on the bed, scrolling through her phone, flinching at every noise outside. "We can't wait for the police to figure this out," Marcus said firmly, breaking the silence. "If they're going to keep coming at us, we need to be a step ahead." Amelia sighed. "And how exactly do we do that? These people clearly have resources. We don't even know what they're fully capable of." Marcus leaned back, his mind working overtime. "Then we find out. Reed and Lang are used to scaring people into submission, but they've never dealt with someone who's willing to fight back." Amelia looked at him, concern etched across her face. "What are you planning?" Marcus took a deep breath. "I found a pattern in Reed's victims. He targets couples like us, people he thinks are vulnerable. But I also found a few cases where things didn't go his way. One couple pushed back, and their story was buried in the news. I'm going to reach out to them." Amelia sat up, her interest piqued. "Do you think they'll talk to us?" "It's worth a shot," Marcus said. "If they've dealt with Reed before, they might know something we can use." That afternoon, Marcus tracked down the couple, Evan and Sarah Caldwell, a pair who had once owned a small bakery in another state. Reed had targeted them years ago, claiming their shop caused him food poisoning, and tried to extort them for damages. The Caldwells had fought back, but the ordeal had taken a toll. They eventually sold their bakery and moved to a quieter town. Marcus found a phone number for them and called. The line rang several times before a cautious voice answered. "Hello? Hi, this is Marcus Jones. I'm sorry to bother you, but I think you might be able to help me. My wife and I are dealing with Jonathan Reed, and I heard you've had experience with him." The line went silent for a moment. Then the voice on the other end spoke again, more guarded. "Reed? Are you in trouble?" "Yes," Marcus admitted. "He's been targeting us with threats, just like he did with you. We're trying to fight back, but we need more information." There was a pause, and then the voice softened. "Okay, where are you? Can you meet us in person?" Marcus glanced at Amelia, who nodded. "We're at a motel outside of town. Can we meet somewhere public?" The Caldwells agreed to meet them at a nearby coffee shop later that evening. The coffee shop was quiet, with only a few customers scattered around. Marcus and Amelia sat at a corner table, nervously sipping their drinks as they waited. A few minutes later, a couple in their late 40s entered, looking around cautiously. Marcus recognized them from the photos he'd seen online. "Evan and Sarah?" he asked, standing up to greet them. Evan nodded, his expression serious. "You must be Marcus. And this is your wife?" "Yes, Amelia," she said, shaking their hands. The four of them sat down, and Marcus wasted no time explaining their situation. As he spoke, Sarah's face darkened, and Evan's jaw tightened. "Reed hasn't changed a bit," Evan said bitterly when Marcus finished. "He's a parasite, preying on people who don't know how to fight back." Sarah nodded. "He nearly ruined us. We spent months trying to clear our names, and even when we won, it cost us everything. But we learned a lot about him during that time." Marcus leaned forward. "Like what?" "For starters," Evan said, "Reed works with Lang because he's good at covering his tracks. Lang is the one who digs up dirt and plants evidence. He's also the one who intimidates people into settling." Sarah added, "But they're not invincible. Reed has a few weaknesses, things he doesn't want people to know." "Like what?" Amelia asked, her voice urgent. Evan glanced around, lowering his voice. "Reed has a gambling problem, big enough that he's in debt to some very dangerous people. He hides it well, but if you know where to look, you can find records of his losses." Sarah nodded. "And Lang? He's ruthless, but he's sloppy. He's been accused of harassment before, but no one's been able to make it stick. If you can get proof of his methods, you might have a chance to bring them both down." Armed with this new information, Marcus and Amelia returned to the motel, their minds racing with possibilities. They now had a clearer picture of who they were dealing with, but the question remained. How could they use it to their advantage? Amelia paced the room. "If we can prove Reed's gambling debt or catch Lang in the act, that could change everything." Marcus nodded. "It's risky, but it might be our best shot." That night, Marcus began digging deeper into Reed's financial history. Using online resources and public records, he found scattered evidence of large transactions at casinos and payments to obscure entities. It wasn't enough to build a case, but it was a start. Meanwhile, Amelia worked on gathering any information about Lang. She scoured forums and social media, searching for stories of his harassment. Eventually, she found a thread where someone had posted about Lang following them and threatening their family. "This guy has a pattern," she said, showing Marcus the post. "If we can link him to what's happening to us, it'll backfire on him." Their progress was interrupted around midnight by the sound of a loud thud outside their window. Marcus grabbed a flashlight and cautiously approached, peeking through the curtains. He couldn't see anything, but the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. "Stay here," he told Amelia, grabbing his phone and stepping outside. The parking lot was eerily quiet, the only sound the distant hum of the highway. Marcus swept the flashlight around, his grip tightening as he spotted something near their car. It was a small, black box. His heart pounded as he knelt to examine it. The box had no markings, but a faint red light blinked on its side. "Amelia," he called, his voice shaky. "Call the police. Now." She appeared at the window, her face pale with fear. "What is it?" "I don't know," Marcus said, backing away, "but I'm not taking any chances." Before they could react further, the box emitted a sharp beep, and a plume of thick smoke erupted from it, filling the parking lot. Marcus stumbled back, coughing as the acrid smell burned his throat. Amelia screamed from inside, and Marcus shouted, "Get down! Stay inside!" As the smoke cleared, Marcus saw a figure standing at the edge of the lot, watching. The person turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving Marcus seething with rage. This was no longer a game. It was a war, and Marcus was ready to fight. The parking lot reeked of burned chemicals as Marcus stumbled back into the motel room, coughing. Amelia rushed to his side, her face pale with worry. "What was that?" she asked, gripping his arm tightly. "Some kind of smoke device," Marcus said, trying to catch his breath. "They're sending a message. They want us to feel trapped." Amelia's voice trembled. "Marcus, this isn't just about intimidation anymore. What if they try to hurt us for real?" He placed his hands on her shoulders, looking her in the eye. "I won't let that happen. But we need to act now. We have to take the fight to them before they push any further." The police arrived shortly after, Detective Harris among them. His expression hardened when he saw the aftermath of the smoke device. "They're escalating," Harris said, pacing the small room. "This isn't just a scare tactic anymore. They're crossing into dangerous territory." Marcus folded his arms. "So what are you going to do about it?" "We've already started building a case," Harris replied. "The texts, the calls, the vandalism, and now this. It's all adding up. But we need something concrete to pin Reed and Lang down. Something undeniable." Marcus nodded grimly. "Then we'll get it." Harris raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "They're not going to stop until they think they've won," Marcus said. "So we'll make them think they have the upper hand. We'll draw them out, and when they make their move, we'll catch them red-handed." Harris hesitated. "That's risky, Marcus. These men are dangerous." "So are cornered people," Marcus said firmly. "And they've pushed us into a corner." Back at the motel, Marcus and Amelia began laying out a plan. With Harris's reluctant approval, they decided to lure Lang into revealing his hand. Using a combination of social media posts and carefully leaked information, they would create the illusion that Marcus was ready to settle the complaint, giving Reed and Lang the impression that their intimidation was working. Amelia posted a vague update on her professional page, mentioning financial struggles and a desire to put this matter behind us. Marcus, meanwhile, contacted the restaurant's manager, subtly suggesting that he was considering reaching out to Reed for a resolution. The bait was set. All they could do now was wait. 3 days later, Lang bit. Marcus received a call from an unknown number. He answered cautiously, putting the phone on speaker so Amelia could hear. "Mr. Jones," Lang's smooth but sinister voice came through the line. "It seems you've come to your senses." Marcus played along, keeping his tone neutral. "I just want this to be over. Tell Reed I'm willing to settle." Lang chuckled. "Smart choice. Let's meet and discuss terms. When and where? Marcus asked. I'll text you the details, Lang replied. And don't even think about involving the cops. If I see so much as a patrol car, the deal's off. The line went dead. The text came minutes later, an address to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Harris and his team quickly arranged a sting operation, setting up surveillance around the area. Marcus and Amelia would wear hidden microphones, and plainclothes officers would remain nearby, ready to move in at a moment's notice. As they prepared to leave, Amelia's hands shook as she pinned the microphone to Marcus' shirt. Are you sure about this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus cupped her face in his hands. We don't have a choice. This is the only way to stop them. She nodded reluctantly, her eyes brimming with tears. Just promise me you'll be careful. I promise, Marcus said, pulling her into a tight hug. The warehouse was a hulking, rusted structure surrounded by overgrown weeds and broken concrete. The air was heavy with the smell of decay and oil. Marcus and Amelia parked their car as instructed and stepped out, their movements deliberate and calm despite the anxiety coursing through them. Lang was already waiting inside, standing in the shadows near a makeshift table. He was tall and wiry, with sharp features and a predatory grin. Marcus felt a shiver run down his spine as Lang's cold eyes locked onto them. Well, Lang said, his voice dripping with mockery. The happy couple. I hope you've come with an open mind. Marcus forced himself to stay composed. We're here to settle this. Lang smirked. Good. But let's get one thing straight. I call the shots. You'll pay what we ask, and in return, this whole unpleasant situation goes away. Amelia clenched her fists, but Marcus placed a calming hand on her arm. How much? 50,000, Lang said without hesitation. Payable within 48 hours. And don't even think about negotiating. Marcus feigned a stunned expression. That's insane. We don't have that kind of money. Lang's grin widened. Then I suggest you find a way. Sell your car, take out a loan. I don't care. But if you don't pay, things will get complicated. Amelia couldn't hold back any longer. You're disgusting, she spat. Do you really think you can just bully people into giving you money? Lang's expression darkened, and he took a step toward her. Watch your tone, sweetheart. You're in no position to make demands. Marcus stepped between them, his heart pounding. Back off. Lang laughed coldly. You've got spirit. I'll give you that. But spirit won't save you. Suddenly, Lang's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his smirk vanishing. This conversation's over, he said sharply, backing away. You have 48 hours. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Lang had noticed something, maybe the surveillance or a suspicious detail. As Lang turned to leave, Marcus blurted, What about Reed? Where's he in all this? Lang paused, a glint of amusement returning to his eyes. You're not ready to meet the boss. He disappeared into the shadows, leaving Marcus and Amelia standing alone in the dimly lit warehouse. Outside, Harris and his team intercepted them. We heard everything, the detective said, but we need more. Lang didn't incriminate Reed directly, and without stronger evidence, we can't take this to court. Marcus clenched his fists, his frustration boiling over. So what do we do now? Let him walk away? No, Harris said firmly. We tighten the net. Lang slipped up tonight. He doesn't know we're onto him yet. If we play this right, we'll catch him and Reed in the act. But Marcus wasn't convinced. Lang's parting words haunted him. You're not ready to meet the boss. It wasn't just a threat. It was a challenge. And Marcus intended to meet that challenge head-on. The warehouse encounter left Marcus with more questions than answers. Detective Harris had assured him that the operation was progressing, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. Lang's threats echoed in his mind, and Reed's unseen presence loomed like a shadow. He decided that if this was going to end, he would have to push it to a conclusion himself. 2 days later, Marcus received a text from Lang. Last chance. Same place, tonight. 9 p.m. Bring the money or face the consequences. Marcus showed the message to Harris, who immediately began coordinating another sting operation. But Marcus had another idea, a more dangerous one. We've been playing by their rules this whole time, Marcus said, pacing the motel room. It's time to turn the tables. What are you thinking? Harris asked. Marcus stopped, his face resolute. I'm going to confront Reed directly. Harris frowned. Marcus, that's reckless. We can't protect you if you go off script. I don't care, Marcus said firmly. Reed thinks he's untouchable. If I can get him to show his hand, he'll slip up. Harris hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. All right, but if you're doing this, we're backing you up. Wear a wire, and we'll stay close. That night, Marcus and Amelia returned to the warehouse, their fear masked by determination. The tension in the air was palpable as they stepped inside. Lang was waiting, leaning casually against the table. But this time, he wasn't alone. Jonathan Reed stood beside him, dressed in a sharp suit and radiating confidence. His expression was cold and calculating as he sized up Marcus and Amelia. So, Reed said, his voice smooth and venomous, you finally decided to play ball. Marcus forced himself to stay calm. We're here to end this. Reed smirked. Smart choice. Let's talk numbers. But Marcus wasn't interested in negotiation. This isn't about money, Reed. This is about you thinking you can bully people into submission. You've gotten away with it for years, but that ends tonight. Reed's smirk faltered for a moment before he chuckled. You've got guts, I'll give you that. But guts won't save you. Pay up, or things get ugly. Marcus stepped closer, his voice rising. You're a coward, Reed. You hide behind threats and lies because you're too weak to face real consequences. Reed's composure cracked. He stepped forward, his face inches from Marcus. You think you're brave? You're nothing. I own this game. Behind him, Lang shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the shadows where Harris and his team were hidden. Marcus noticed the movement and pressed harder. Is that why you're drowning in gambling debt? Marcus shot back. You're so desperate that you've resorted to blackmail and extortion to keep your head above water. Reed froze, his expression darkening. You don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I do, Marcus said, his voice dripping with defiance. And so do the police. Reed's eyes darted around, realizing too late that the room was rigged with surveillance. Before he could react, Detective Harris and his team emerged from the shadows, their guns drawn. Jonathan Reed, Thomas Lang, Harris said firmly, you're both under arrest for extortion, harassment, and conspiracy. Reed's confidence shattered as officers surrounded him. You can't do this, he shouted. I'll have your badges. Lang tried to flee but was tackled to the ground by an officer. He cursed loudly as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Amelia clung to Marcus, tears streaming down her face as the nightmare finally came to an end. Reed and Lang were led away in handcuffs, their protests drowned out by the sound of justice catching up with them. In the weeks that followed, Marcus and Amelia worked to rebuild their lives. With Reed and Lang behind bars, the false complaint was dropped and the threats stopped. The ordeal had left scars, but it had also strengthened their bond. One evening, as they sat on the couch in their now peaceful apartment, Amelia turned to Marcus. You were incredible, you know? Marcus smiled, pulling her close. We were incredible. We stood up to them together. She rested her head on his shoulder. Do you think they'll try something like this again? Marcus shook his head. Not after the evidence Harris has on them. They'll be locked away for a long time. Amelia sighed in relief. Good. I'm ready to move on. So am I, Marcus said, his voice steady. But I'll never forget how far we were pushed, and how we pushed back. For the first time in months, they felt safe. And as the weight of their ordeal lifted, they knew they had not only survived, they had won.